really happy to be here. We're going to cover the art of communicating your institution's values and how that impacts the way that you attract your ideal students and the way that you create a culture, an institutional culture that inspires. Um, I'm Ian Evenstar. I'm the founder and CEO of Unincorporated, a higher education agency dedicated to the mission of education. And I'm here today with Robert Johns, our Chief Operating Officer, and Rebecca Kohler, who is our Chief Design Officer, who are both intimately aware of how we see branding, how we execute this and implement this, and how passionate we are about education and why this is so important to educators, senior administration, and ultimately the student experience. Values are a really important part of an institution's brand. The thing is that nearly every institution or academic unit or college has values. And yet what we have found and what we see is that very few actually leverage them beyond, maybe a secondary or a tertiary page on a website or somewhere amidst the employee, staff, faculty handbook, or even the student handbook. So the big idea here, and really what we're driving to, is when we properly articulate, implement, measure, and continue to communicate our institution's values, they can be very effective in attracting the ideal student and creating that culture that inspires. So we all have them, but we have found that even a small incremental step in articulating them, executing them, and continuing to communicate them can go a long way to reach these important objectives. But how? How do we do this? Well, what we want to emphasize is we need to leverage our institution's values to drive qualified leads and ultimately to nurture that culture that inspires. I know that qualified leads can feel a bit taboo in our space. We don't like to think of prospective students necessarily as leads or as customers. So it can feel taboo. So I think it's important to qualify what we mean by qualified, and that basically comes down to students that are the best fit for your institution, students that are ultimately, and this is students, at the undergraduate level, graduate, and PhD or doctorate level. These are students who are drawn to your institution and your programs because of your values, and that makes them qualified. So I'm using qualified in a very specific way with the sense that they are the best fit for your programs based on your institution's values. And when we nurture and develop a culture at our institution that is value-based, we start to see that not only students, but the staff, the faculty, the senior administration, everyone within the department, the academic unit, or the institution at large, if they start to embody the values, that will ultimately shape the culture. And when we say culture, we can look at, what's the institutional culture on campus? What is the culture like, or the vibe, and the way the classroom feels within classroom, both online as well as in person? It can mean the type of faculty instruction, or the type of pedagogy, the culture of the pedagogy, and the culture and the type of the research that's being developed. So culture really is far-reaching, and it stems from this premise of values. So our agenda today will cover a lot of ground, and I just wanted to share with you before we get into the agenda that, it was for me, I was in a room very similar to this, a Zoom room, and it had been nearly 2 decades of working within higher education, running an agency committed to education, spending a year in the classroom, as a part-time faculty member. At that point in my career, I had launched numerous brand campaigns, from recruitment marketing campaigns to operational campaigns like homecoming, commencement. And I was sitting in a brand strategy session with a new client, and they were explaining their goals. And just like you, they had goals like trying to reach their target audience and grow awareness for their programs and differentiate their programs from their competitors, or looking to improve the general culture of the organization. But the catch was they refused to think of themselves as a brand. They said, we are not a brand. We do not have this brand identity. So it became very difficult for us to help them manifest that desired identity, the ideal persona of the brand that they were looking to embody and create. So in that moment, I had an aha moment. I realized that we needed to spend more time in this area, and this is why we've developed and are delivering these webinars, really to help institutions and people like yourself make transformative changes. And it can be incremental, nothing happens overnight, but make those transformative changes using what we refer to as our brand manifesto system. So today we're looking at one component, which are values, one component of the brand manifesto, which are your values. And in the next 20 to 25 minutes, we will go into what is a brand manifesto. We'll look at again, the signature component of that for today, which is defining and articulating your brand values. Then looking at how to implement them and measure the impact of your values, and then how to continue to communicate your values, especially on your website, and then final thoughts and next steps. So with that, I will turn it over to Robert Johns, who will start with our first item, and what is a brand manifesto.
Thanks, Ian. I'm going to assume everybody can see me and hear me okay, because I can't tell, but today's discussion about brand values is so important because of the impact that core values can have across your organization. But it's important to know that values are just one piece of what we call a brand manifesto. So what exactly is a brand manifesto? Well, before we get there, we should probably define what it means, what manifesto means. And as I'm sure you've guessed, a lot of smart people in the room, the root of the word is to manifest. And to manifest means to display, to show, or demonstrate something clearly. It's about making thoughts, ideas, and intentions visible and tangible in the real world. So then, a brand manifesto declares your views, motives, and intentions. It's the core identity of your brand and the genesis of your institution. Your brand manifesto describes what you stand for, what you do every day, and what you're striving to achieve or become. When we talk about a brand manifesto, we're not just talking about abstract ideas or values. We're taking the very essence of what a brand represents and making it manifest in everything the brand does. It's about aligning actions with beliefs and ensuring that every decision, every product, every interaction reflects the core principles of the brand. So one way to visualize this is through 3 concentric circles, each representing a fundamental aspect of your brand's identity. So this structure is going to help us understand how values, mission, vision are interconnected and how they guide everything the brand does. So at the very center, we see values, what we're talking about today. Think of them as the heart and soul of your brand. These are the guiding principles that govern everything you do. They're the beliefs, the ethics that define your brand's character and its culture, and they don't shift no matter what might be happening in the world around you. Then surrounding values is mission. This is what you do day to day in pursuit of your vision. It's the practical application of your values, the actions and the decisions that bring those core principles to life. Your mission is the path that you walk every day, and that path is guided by the light of your values. Then finally, encompassing both of these is your vision. This is the thing that you're aiming at. It's the mountain peak in the distance. Your vision is the long-term goal. It's the dream that you strive to achieve. Your vision is the future you're building that's inspired by your values and pursued through your mission. So for many of you, if you're in higher ed, the vision might be to build a great institution, one that enrolls super smart students, has competitive athletics, makes a positive impact in the community. So in order to do that, you first need to start with the values that will guide your efforts. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Rebecca, who's going to talk about defining your values.
Yeah, because if it is true that values are the core of your institution, you should feel them. They should be defining your company culture, really creating that culture that inspires. I know most folks on this call work for an institution that probably already has their values defined, but do you know them? Do you have them? Do you hold them at the core of what you do every day? And a little deeper than that, does your department or your committee or your program have their values defined? We found that most academic units often define their own set of values that guide their own decisions while still upholding the university values. And that can be a really powerful way to create your internal culture and your decisions. If you do hold true to your institution's values or your unit values or department values, and everyone around them is also holding true to them, they become governing rules for you. The same way that we all have to submit to the laws of physics or societal laws, you and your institution are beholden to your values. Doing this, articulating your values and holding everyone accountable to them, ensures three things. It cultivates your company culture, ensures that if your team, for example, has a value of collaboration, I would imagine your workspace is lively and folks help each other out rather than people working in silos or cubicles. Maybe you work closely with other academic units or departments and collaborate across teams. It should inform every decision you're making. Every decision for you and the institute as a whole should be filtered through your values. What students are you accepting? What programs are you launching? What internal initiatives, committees, research are you doing? If your institution has a value of diversity, you probably already have a central EDI office, but does your academic unit have like a dean of EDI? Do you have someone on your team who's ensuring that all hires are kind of filtered through that value? Finally, it should instruct your everyday activity. Where are you spending your time, your energy, your attention, your money even? Is it a value-driven activity? Thinking about universities, they often have a strategic plan for the next 5, 7, 10 years. How are the values aligning with those university goals? Again, thinking about the value of diversity, if you have a fairly homogeneous student body or internal team, how are you seeking ways to engage with other audiences and reducing their barriers of entry to diversify that team? I will say the risk that comes with not articulating your values and holding true to them is sometimes they become shaped without you totally realizing it. If you're not holding yourselves accountable to the value of excellence, for example, we all know academia is a high stress, tight turnaround world. So people might start cutting corners and just trying to make things work and putting things together in a haphazard way. And you might start to feel you have an unspoken value that just says finished is better than done right. It's a bit of an extreme example, but looking at your activity and decisions, your company culture, what values do you see just by observing, and are those the right ones? The great thing about values is that they can happen at every level. We've talked about institutional values, college values, specific departments, but they can also be committees, teams, and even the individual student. On the USC campus, there's a statue of Tommy Trojan inscribed with the qualities of their ideal student. This is how they articulate their student values and ensure that students see and feel them, so that ultimately they can hold students accountable to the same values as well, and ensure that their students are acting in accordance to them. Once your values are articulated and shared, they're informing your decisions and your culture, the next step is just making sure that they're actually effective. And I'm going to let Ian speak to that.
Yeah, so once the values are properly defined and articulated, documented, maybe inscribed on the, central edifice of campus, they need to be implemented. And then by measuring them, measuring the implementation or the efficacy, you can start to optimize and continue to implement them with greater efficiency and efficacy. The important point that Rebecca made earlier, which I want to emphasize, is that we can work from the governing rules or non-negotiables, those values that we see at the institutional level, and apply our own within our different divisions, our departments, our committees, our teams. We can apply our own that kind of roll up or are in service of the institutional values. So there is some room for personalizing and implementing your own set of values that do uphold the larger university values if you feel, in fact, you do need that level of personalization. But once they're articulated, whether at the institutional level, the college level, or by unit, department, or division, we can then continue to implement and measure them so we will, in fact, create that culture that truly inspires. One big question that I think is fair to ask at any time in any meeting and, at any level really is your university holding its leadership, staff, faculty accountable to their values? Is it holding its students and qualifying its students um, in the same way, keeping them even accountable to the institutional values? This is a big question, and maybe it's not a yes or no. Maybe it's showing up in some places, but not others, and really looking at those places where the university isn't or the team isn't holding each other accountable. That's a good place to apply some thinking around how to implement and make change. But if you can't hold people accountable, if you're not asking this question to begin with, then chances are they haven't been either identified or properly articulated and communicated on a regular basis. And articulating values, it's really important, but without day-to-day celebration of them, without embodying them at every level, and we'll look at ways to embody them and kind of implement them within the institution, but without celebrating them and embodying them and keeping everyone accountable to them, they simply won't be effective in creating that culture that inspires. So how do we embody values? How do we, again, now that they're articulated and identified, how do we embody them? How do we ensure that they're operationalized, if you will? Well, one way and one, I think very clear, tangible, tactical way, and we always advocate for this, is find a way to connect your values to your performance reviews or your performance evaluations, depending on how you conduct those. But if you have a value, let's say around innovation, maybe there is a criteria within the performance evaluation that says, we need to see one small innovation per year from your team or your faculty or from within your classrooms, within the learning outcomes of your curriculum. But that's one way to measure and attach the value to the evaluation of the performance. And what's great is that the value then becomes a way that people add value to your institution. It's a way that not only you're communicating and embodying the value, but it's a way that they can recognize that by doing this, by having a small innovation in their classroom or within their team or within the operations, they're actually adding value to the institution as well. The second item here and the second idea is that you can continue to fold these values into your day-to-day or daily operations. So if you have, say, a professional development stipend as part of the line item in your budget, maybe that professional development stipend is encouraged that staff, faculty go and take a course or attend a conference or even have a book that they're working through or a master class that they're working through, and then they report back to the team on their learnings. If that's a growth value, if you value learning, let's say, this is a real clear way that you could have that operationalized on a day-to-day basis. In terms of the way that you take in students every semester and every quarter, maybe you have a series of questions that you ask on the intake and the application, the essays around values, and you create a set of value-based essay questions to really start to gauge and measure, are these the best fit? Are these the qualified, as I was explaining earlier, are these the best qualified students based on these value set of essay questions? And then third, if you're not celebrating the places where your team is really showing these values and exhibiting these values, this is a big miss. And this is probably the easiest thing, is just to celebrate the wins with your team on the weekly stand-ups, the monthly stand-ups, the quarterlies, right? Pull out those real case studies and have the team share their stories and share their anecdotes and really celebrate the wins that they see where their colleagues are showing up or their fellow staff member or even their students are showing up and embodying these values. And what happens is when we do any one of these three things, any facet of this, by embodying the values, they're going to continue to work like the governing rules of the institution. They will begin to shape the culture in the direction designed by thinking, designed by doing. They will shape the culture the way that you intend, because again, if you remember the brand manifesto, concentric circles, everything emanates outward from the values. And I can't emphasize this enough. If you were to even just take one small step toward implementing your institution's values today and make one small operational change, you will begin to shapeshift. You can be that conduit of change. One small change can shapeshift and begin to change the culture that truly inspires. Let's say you've done this. Let's say you've actually taken these steps. How will you know that your efforts are actually manifesting? How will you know if the culture is beginning to change to that way of thinking? Well, you can always run. So this is how you would measure and determine effectiveness. You can always run anonymous surveys, and we advocate and we sometimes help our university partners come up with these surveys, but you can run those surveys to measure the general attitudes of your team. You can invite feedback directly from students, faculty, and staff, and you can really hone in on areas of the values. Again, it might be growth, or maybe it's learning or innovation or diversity, all the ones that we have touched upon today. If you're experiencing a higher turnover rate, maybe within internal teams, or maybe you're seeing a drop in the percentage of time to complete a degree, or there's percentage of degree completions, any kind of turnover or failure to complete, you can make sure or at least look at some level the values and assess, particularly on the exit interview, whether or not, there was a misalignment of values there, and tailor some of those exit interview questions around your values, represent your values in some way, if in fact you are seeing a higher turnover or an increase in time to complete or completion rate of degrees. And then just a general sense, number 3, this is more anecdotal, but everyone has a feel. Rebecca was saying maybe there's an unspoken value of like, get it done and get it done quickly, and don't ask any questions. And if that's the general sense or the general excitement level that's being observed and felt, then it might be time to raise your hand and address that. But just getting a sense, particularly for those of you in leadership roles, having a general sense of the excitement level and the motivation as new initiatives get assigned, new value focused committees are formed. What actions are they taking? Do they feel motivated, or do they feel overwhelmed? Do they feel empowered? But just getting that anecdotal, qualitative sense of these values at play within these teams can be really helpful. And then based on the information that you gain with these 3 ways of determining effectiveness, you can take those insights and make iterative improvements, right? This, again, is not a flip of a switch type activity. This is a way to do growth-driven iterations of implementation and changes based on the feedback that you're getting. So with that, we are going to look at now communicating your values as part of your external communications, really focus now more on the marketing efforts and the external communications that are outward toward students or prospective students and families, so that you can attract your ideal student. And with that, I will turn it over to Rebecca to share some examples of how to attract your ideal student by communicating the values.
Yeah, before we jump in, the elephant in the room is your values are probably already on your website somewhere, maybe hidden on the About page. Sometimes it's in like the Office of the President or a student area of the website. But the issue is if you're not holding them central, then the only students who find them are going to be the ones who are really searching for it, which might speak to a value of being value driven or like research oriented. But we want to let your values attract people and draw them in rather than make it a hurdle for them to figure out what you're all about. So this particular example is from IUPUI's homepage. That's Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. It's a bit of a mouthful. I want to draw attention to that top screenshot first. When you first land on their website, there's a yellow bar at the bottom that says they are a 2023 Higher Education Excellence in Diversity Award recipient. This is what we call above the fold. This is the first thing you see when you land on their website. And above that is their CTAs, but this is the first thing they're actually telling you about themselves. And they're telling you, we are value driven, we value diversity. And not only that, but we are recognized by external audiences for our value of diversity. Further down on their homepage, they do list their values just kind of straight up. And the top one there is diversity, equity, and inclusion. They make it abundantly clear that this is our promise, that we will hold this central to who we are, and they're delivering on that promise. Now looking at Stanford, Stanford uses a dedicated subdomain rather than putting it all on the homepage. They've created the ideal subdomain that highlights their commitment and activities for inclusion, diversity, equity, and access in a learning environment. So here they describe what this means, what actions are they taking. They can provide news and updates about what they're doing, as well as like reports on how they are upholding this value. One of the important things when putting your values on your website is connecting everything. Ian talked about how we can connect values to internal performance reviews, but you should also be connecting them to your external strategy for your overall university. The University of Leeds, in this case, did a 10-year plan they called Universal Values Global Change, and their values are at the heart of everything in the strategic plan. They take the values and they show them how they're driving their aims and their objectives and even their everyday actions. So thinking about that concentric ring of values, mission, and vision, this is all in one place where their values are driving their mission and are driving their vision, this 10-year plan. And then we've mentioned this a little bit as well, but ensuring that your values are articulated at every level. So Cornell University has their university core values. And then on the College of Agriculture and Life Science, they have their own set of values that they share with their students. And then even the Department of Facilities and Campus Services, something that isn't necessarily student-facing in the traditional way, they define their own values so that they can uphold themselves to those values and ensure that they are communicating out how that rolls up to the larger values of the university. One of the biggest things you can do when it comes to your values is report back, like be transparent, be honest about how you are doing. When you are measuring that efficacy, be transparent about it. This is the Rhode Island School of Design. They don't have a great articulation of values, I'll say, but they do have really great objectives from their strategic plan, which are driven by their values. And they provide regular updates. This is like a 2-year progress report that they shared. What's really cool about this is that Ian mentioned you can run like anonymous surveys internally. They do the same thing externally. They invite questions and feedback and conversations about their values and how they're upholding themselves to those values. Don't let them be a static thing, basically, but continue to invite conversations about your values. And this last one is my little curveball. It's definitely not a website, but I think it's a really cool way to let your values be displayed on campus and really let them be part of that everyday campus life. We looked at the Tommy Trojan statue, which is definitely one way. MIT did something a little bit different where they had these like billboard-sized banners that showed all their values in their main lobby so that anyone who came in, they would be welcomed with their values. They could see that these are what we stand for, what we hold ourselves to, whether you're a student walking on campus or someone visiting for the first time. It makes them super accessible to everyone on campus and lets it really permeate that everyday campus life.
Thank you, Rebecca. So we will proceed to summarize and leave you with some final thoughts. But before we do, I know that there are 2 types of people in this world. There are those that attend a webinar and maybe take some diligent notes and then get busy and continue on with their day without really making a change. And then there are those who attend a webinar or a seminar and make those notes and then actually do one incremental change. So I encourage you to be of the second type and, really set your sights on making one small incremental change, whether it's operationalizing one of the values, perhaps it's developing and having a conversation around personalized set of values for your team or your committee or your division. Maybe it's you're part of a web redesign committee, and you're thinking of how you might create a narrative on your new homepage. And maybe it's just ensuring that values at some level of representation in the photos or in the text on page, or maybe by having that strategic plan more accessible on the homepage, contributing that thought and expressing the importance of communicating those values more readily on the homepage, wherever it is. The point I'm getting to is that wherever you touch day to day, you can actually take some of this and apply one small thing. And I encourage you to do that. Why? Well, it's because your values are who you are at the core. It is the core of your identity. Can't emphasize that enough. You are achieving your mission, day-to-day operations, those ideal habits day-to-day, whether it's of your students, of your faculty, of your senior administration, of your leadership, of your president's office, what you're doing day to day, which is aiming at what you want to become and what you want to achieve long term, your vision, that stems from and comes from the core of who you are. And who you are those non-negotiables, those principal governing rules, governing laws of your identity, your values. That's what makes you unique. That's what draws those perfect, best fit, qualified leads of students to your institution. And that's the way that you truly design and develop and nurture a culture that inspires, because it's who you are at the core. So by leveraging your institution's values to drive those qualified leads, those best fit students, and make that transformative change to the culture, the institution culture, you will in fact create the culture that inspires. How do we do that? Well, we can implement our institution's brand values by constructing a mission, vision, and values, a manifesto. We can align our team around our brand values. We looked at ways to implement this day to day, as well as ways that you can measure the efficacy and you report back and make changes. And then lastly, we looked at ways to communicate your values on your website, communicate them within your strategic plan, and really show and demonstrate the commitment you have to your values so that students and alumni and prospective faculty members and donors, parents, they can all feel and identify with the values that really truly make you unique. So with that, we'll turn it over to Robert. He has a few final thoughts, and then we'll open it up for any questions or comments if there are some.
Awesome. Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Rebecca. So as we've explored today, values are the core, or the heartbeat of the brand manifesto. The values are just one piece of the intricate puzzle, and the brand manifesto is actually just one component of a fully formed brand. And what brings it all together is what we call a brand activation plan. Now, this is a comprehensive strategy that takes the essence of your brand as defined by your manifesto and activates it across all touch points, ensuring that there's a consistent and resonant experience for your audience. So a brand activation plan is not just about logos, slogans, or advertisements. It's about creating a living, breathing brand that connects, engages, and inspires. It's about turning your vision into reality and standing out in a crowded marketplace. So if you're intrigued at all by the idea of creating a brand activation plan for your organization, we're obviously here to help. So you can visit unincorporated.com to learn more, or you can email us at info@unincorporated.com and we'll be in touch. One final thing I wanted to mention, if you're interested in taking the first step into finding your brand manifesto, we've actually created a free workbook that's going to help you write a mission statement that adds value, build a vision statement that truly matters, and as we've been talking about today, create values that have meaning and inspire. So if you're interested, you can visit unincorporated.com/brand manifesto to download the workbook. We'll also drop the link in the chat if somebody can do that. For anybody who's interested, thank you, Rebecca. And with that, we will wrap up. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Robert. So we'll go ahead and conclude. It's been wonderful to present on values as one key component, if not the central component of a brand manifesto. Have a great day. Thank you for all your service within higher education. It truly does matter. And of course, education is the primary means of ascension. So you are a central figure in that, and couldn't thank you enough. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye-bye.